So, Evgenia, thank you very much. It's a huge honor to talk with you about this amazing, amazing film that's reaching so high right now in so many festivals, and so many people are going to the theaters to watch it, which is amazing, amazing.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Leander, for inviting. It's a big pleasure to be talking about the film. Yeah, the itinerary of it is it's been great so far, and we're crossing fingers for some news soon as well.
And I watched it recently, and it's very fresh in my mind. And what stuck with me, it was kind of this sensation of a sunny noir, elements of some genres that we used to see with the presence of darkness, like thrillers and suspense. Uh, but this story being told with a very tropical feeling, with the sun very present, with a beautiful day, but at the same time terrible things happening in the shadows, which give another meanings to terrible things happening in the shadows as well. So this kind of tropical noir or western with a ginga, it's some things that stuck with me. So it's as this beautiful feeling of watching something that's elements that we are so used to see in foreign movies in Brazil, but told in a way that is very much Brazilian. And I think that's what gives it such a unique atmosphere, is that we recognize that those elements, but they're being told in a very Brazilian way, and I think that's beautiful made by all the crew. And I wanted to discuss with you this some of these elements. For example, the constant vigilance, or some kind of the paranoia that surrounds the main character. How was this for you? This working with these elements through this lens of the a sunny, beautiful day.
Yeah, I think it was the first thing we discussed with Kleber when we met actually in Bordeaux. Even before the film was in pre-production, it was our first discussion around the script, and we decided that we really, didn't want to do, not because the film is dramatic, we want to put dramatic music and dramatic colors and everything go dark, because it would be too frontal. And I think Kleber is somebody who has a lot of humor, even when talking about serious things, humor in the sense of irony, sarcasm, or some detached view on something, which is I think it's very intelligent. So we both agreed we wanted the film to be bright and sunny, also because that's how it happened in the 70s during the dictatorship. Like all of those like horrendous crimes, they were happening in plain daylight. Like in 9 Days to Aqui, when they take away the father of the family, it happens during the daytime, and nobody can do nothing. So O Agente Secreto doesn't talk about the dictatorship, frontally. You never hear people talking, the regime or army or military troops, but you know how all of those different characters, how their lives are impacted by it. You see through them, through their everyday life, through the story of a girl who got killed, and then there was this lady who was responsible, or the story about Marcella being chased, or Bobby whose mom was killed and who finds himself working with a killer and being killer himself. All of those people's life were impacted by the times they were living in. So we thought it was strangely enough, to describe the consequences, the horrendous consequences of those times. We also wanted the film to be colorful, and you know, Kleber has some kind of nostalgia for Recife from 70s, so he really wanted to reproduce it, And the world in those times was very colorful, and somehow during the time we lost it. Like if you see our cars, or the cars people drive today, or what is classy to be worn, like costumes, everything is so, well, less at least less in Brazil, but in many countries it's very black, gray, white, and beige in like, Airbnb world. And Brazil in the 70s, it was so, so juicy, so there were so many color suggestions, and we just wanted it to be there in the film.
Yeah, it's like framing the consequences of a terrible act. It's such a clever way to tell these stories. It's like we seeing the consequences of an atomic bomb instead of seeing the explosion itself. And the humor you talked about is also very clever because it's almost a rebellious act to smile on that time, or to, like, when Wagner Moura Marcelo goes to the movie theater, and there's some people having sex during the movie projection, like living and having pleasure and everything during this terrible time is also an act of resistance.
Exactly.
I was curious about, I think it was on another interview that I saw that Kleber promoted like a screening of Barry Lyndon by Kubrick, and it was like with you, and I think Wagner was also present.
Yeah, we actually were four, and we were back at Kleber's and Emily's house. Four of us, Wagner, me, and them too, and we watched Barry Lyndon all together. And it wasn't actually a reference for the film, but somehow, spending time together and sharing what we like in cinema was kind of part of, getting together and just having good time together, but also exchanging on some important matters. And I really liked Barry Lyndon, so I was very happy to watch it again in the group of like brilliant people, because the discussion after was also very nourishing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about. It was something, if there's some specific elements of this movie that you guys were paying attention to, or if it was like a bonding thing for you guys to work together. Because you ended working with Kleber because of Heartless, right? The movie by Nara Normandi.
Well, hopefully not just because of Heartless, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So, Agente Secreto is my second film in Brazil, and the first one I shot was Sem Coração by Nara Normandi e Tiao. We shot it in 2022 in next to on the beach of Guaxuma, actually, where Nara spent her childhood. And it was produced. The film was produced by Cinemascopium, so Emily and Kleber. And I think what Kleber tells me is when he saw the film finished, he really liked the colors because they were. I like colorful films. Well, it depends on the story, but in general, like if you watch my filmography, like most of the films are quite colorful. Because I don't know, I don't like being shy in photography. Sometimes even I don't like being too good tasted. I just like when there is some risk taking, and also some cinematographers, like in theory of cinematography, some people might get carried about Brazil, because shooting in Brazil, because you come and the sun rises, and in 20 minutes it's so high up, it's so zenithal that like there is no chance for you to not to have some under eye shadows, or it's very hard to control. But this is something I actually loved about it, because it's so strong and there's so much character in it. So I really wasn't trying to hide, in making all of this, very soft light, very flattering, but not realistic at all. And I think I kept the same approach in The Secret Agent, because it's just the sun is there and it's burning and it's hitting on the heads of people, it's there, but it's also something that brings a lot of joy. So I wanted to be present on screen in both of those films.
And I just remember that with Heartless we have the image of the whale at the beach, right? So I just remember that, like making a parallel with the shark.
Yeah.
It is amazing
Yeah,
that
like
working in those two movies.
every time I come to Brazil, there's some mammal from ocean in the film.
Right. From the first time you read the script, from the first day on set, is there something that's changed drastically from your perspective about the story?
The first time I read the script I found it brilliant from the beginning, and it was a very long script, like 180 pages. But there were also some drawings from Kleber inside of it, and some framing ideas. It was a very rich script, with so many characters, and I really had to, read it through several times to, integrate it. The film, how it is today, it's very, very loyal to the script. I think Kleber just cut out one scene, which was very beautiful visually. And it was actually shot by Unit B, so I have nothing to do with it. Well, I do, but indirectly. And Kleber just cut it because of the narration, how it didn't fit well. But everything else was there. And most of the shots actually were there. Like, yeah, it's all in there.
He's a brilliant script writer. I think that's one of the reasons that he released his scripts as a book after. It evokes so many images. And did you guys storyboard it together? And also, I want to ask about, because you operated the camera as well, right?
Yeah.
So you're, in some sense, you were the first spectator to see everything that we are watching later in the movie theaters. Also considering that, and the fact that it's is a movie with a huge scope, there's a lot of preparations in it. Does that allow some rooms for improvisations on set or to new discoveries during the shootings?
No, we didn't storyboard at all. The truth is, Kleber has his own way of working on shot list. In the beginning, we were just like deliberately discussing it going through script. And then I was like, Kleber, we need to write it down, we need to make it quite clear what we're filming. And he was like, well, I never used to do it with Pedro Sotero, the DOP of previous films that Kleber did. And I was like, yeah, but you guys, for example, Bacurau, you shot a lot outside, and it wasn't very much of a period film. But here we are in, so many locations and so many complicated shots, and it's a period film. So if we arrive on set and we say that we're going to shoot 360 degrees, like people from our department will just go crazy, we just need, some kind of a frame line. So we actually, we sat and we worked together on a shot list. And so it was more or less clear what we were shooting on the day. But then still, when we were arriving on set, there were some improvisation left because, there were so many cool things to shoot. You can do a shot list, and then there is an amazing car that is in the frame, and you just want, to put a camera and to film its lights when it's driving, and it trembles. So we did improvise on set as well. And I think, well, actually, in terms of preparation, I don't think we had that much time, me with Kleber, because I think I came for scouting first for 1 week, then I flew back to Paris, and then I came back, and 3 weeks later we were filming. So that was kind of all our preparation time. But we were very efficient, and also, I don't know, I'm that kind of person who doesn't search a perfection. I really like when the life intervenes in filmmaking. So, so it makes us keeping our eyes open and see what's really happening on set. What are the actors delivering? So that's also why I like operating camera, because I get to be the person who reacts if something's happened. If there's something more beautiful going on than what we are filming, I can suggest. Like, I have my eye on everything. And when I film, when I'm behind the camera, I'm actually staying very, how would I call it? A moment of open mind, open heart, and open eyes. It's just, I'm trying to be there as 100% present. When we are with actors, it's not only actors who give us to the camera, but it's also about what the cameraman gives back, or camera woman. So it happened many times with Wagner that we were, kind of giving each other the energy, and there was like a special exchange between us. And then we were shooting a lot with 2 cameras. So there was Marcelo Lordello, who was operating the big camera. And on my camera, I always had a small monitor that was showing me what he was framing. And then we had those, headphones and mics. So sometimes during the take, I was like, shouting to him, about the exposure or maybe some framing ideas, and we were in constant connection.
I was asking myself exactly that, what you said about working with Wagner Moura, because having watched so many movies during his career, he has an amazing filmography. He has a very vivid and alive acting kind of act. He even calls it sometimes as ashe acting, which is, I think, is amazing. It's his own method. And it's something that I wanted to ask you about, like how was the synergy between you and him, and how controlled was him on the set, because his character is very much controlled, like his every action it's thought beforehand. At the same time, he's very light, with, I think it's a great contrast. It's a great decision he made for his character. Like, he's carrying so much weight from what is happening, but at the same time he's so light. He's almost constantly has a smile on his face, and he's so light in his gestures and the way he treats the other people. So how was the synergy between you and him during the shooting?
Well, it was amazing to work with Wagner because he is a great human being. First of all, he really comes on set and he asks everybody how are they doing, and he's a very warm person, and he also, I'm of Soviet origin. I was born in USSR, and Wagner is, I think he's communist, and also he loves very much Russian literature, so he was always asking me a lot about those stuff. And then he's also a very good professional. Like, you can see he's very, very well-trained actor. I mean, he walks on set and he knows exactly where is his position, and he knows what is the flat, what is the good light, what is the bad light, where he shouldn't go, where he should go. He always knows how to, use his body, its position in space. So he's just a very, very good professional. And then talking about the character, I think they found it together with Kleber, that they wanted Marcelo to be somebody who's, keeps everything inside. He's very difficult, dark story. He bears it with him, and actually in the film you hardly ever see his character to be very, very emotional. There are just 2 moments when he fights in the restaurant, and then he sleeps and he has this nightmare of Ala Ursa coming, and and he's having nightmare about his wife and his son. So I think these are only 2 very, physically expressive moments, but otherwise, all of the emotion comes literally through his eyes or his, jawbone, or sometimes his posture, or the speed with which he walks. He always found a way how to tell the emotion without being, too over, without being a Mickey Mouse, basically, without giving it all to you. It was brilliant to watch.
Which makes a lot of sense, because he's hiding in plain inside, in some sense. So externalizing this lightness is also a sense of I'm hiding nothing, at the same time that he is. And it's also very interesting, the sense of the way that he shows masculinity, because we are used to see the characters in Western or thrillers, like you said, he has so much inside, and usually people put a wall in front of it. So we have this image of the hero with the stoned face, and he gives this a new color. So treating all of these weights with lightness. I wanted to ask you also about the crew. Did also brought some crew from other countries as well, or was like 100% Brazilians?
No, the 2 films, the 2 Brazilian films I worked on, every time it was a local crew, which I couldn't be happier about. Amazing people. So I had a full female camera team, really good badasses from Sao Paulo, led by Giovanna Giordano, who is just an amazing first AC. And I just don't want to say to everybody, because I hope they won't be offended by that, but also lights, I was accompanied by Where Dino, who is based in Sao Paulo, just amazing gaffer. I could completely rely on him. And yeah, he upgraded my level of Portuguese and technical Portuguese. And then there was Carlinhos Tareco, who is the head grip and with whom I previously worked on Sem Coração, and who is a local grip from Pernambuco. And it was such a joy to work with those people. And the team was amazing, like the best I could ever dreamed of.
I want to discuss with you this phenomenon. I think we can call that we perceive like the more local stories, the more focus on a very specific region. Sometimes it's reach more audience abroad. It's happening exactly that with the secret agents. What's your take on that? Since you also came from a foreign country to do this movie, what's your take on that? What do you think is the appeal for foreign audiences?
Well, yeah, like it was with I'm Still Here or The Secret Agent. I think they come both of those films. They are very universal because they talk about oppression regimes and how they impact individuals' life, and it couldn't be more in time than with the world of today. Actually, when I was traveling around US for film promotion, like people were coming to us saying like, the film resonated so much with us and with our situation in United States. So, I mean, it's just done in the right time, but the topic is very, very, very universal. And but somehow I'm very happy because it seems that Brazil is one of those countries which is rising now, and some of other countries which go down. But it's very pleasant to see the Brazilian example of how you guys get back on track with the last presidential elections, and how culture comes back. It was always there, of course, but I can imagine it got somehow easier to be heard and to create now. When I first came to Brazil, I was very much impressed by the richness of the country, because it's like there are so many dimensions to it. It's not only about sun, carnival, ocean, and samba. It's so rich with its history, with the indigenous people, the black slaves, the German and Japanese immigration later, and it's all impacted, in cuisine, in music, in films and books. But then there is also, there is a generosity in people, but then there is also poverty, and then there is also criminality, but at the same time the help between people, and it makes it so rich and so special that I mean, you have like I don't know how many more stories to tell about Brazil. I'm sure there will be plenty more.
Some experiences, they are universal. I think it was a quote from Roger Dinkins. He said like his ultimate goal is to show how similar the person watching is from the guy next door. And I think it's a little bit of that, because at the end we have very similar habits on our day-to-day, right? How do you see that directing your own movies? Because you have like 3 short films and you're creating a feature, is that right?
Yeah.
How does affect your perceive of cinematography? How did it affect or how these different functions combine with each other?
I think there are different types of cinematographers, and we're all like different chess figures that are needed in cinematography, And I'm definitely not the cinematographer who is only into aesthetics, or I'm not very much nerdy about the equipment. I mean, it's not my first passion. It's not why I'm making films. It's because I really seek the sense behind the stories that are told. So the meaning is very important to me. So The Secret Agent was brilliant to me, because one of my favorite films ever is Once Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest. So about a person being rebellious towards, against the system and rising up against the system. And I think The Secret Agent is also about that. And in general, the topic of state oppression and one individual fighting against it, it's something that touches me a lot. So I'm not sure how I deviated to that, but yeah, I mean when I'm behind the camera for someone's films, I will never, refuse to shoot because unless we can afford it, but I will never refuse to shoot the moment which is very there emotionally. The actors are ready, and the light is not perfect. I think the story and the acting is come above, and then cinematography will survive somehow. It depends, of course, on the shot, but yeah. So I think my idea of why I do this comes also from this desire to direct and the stories to tell. But I have a huge imposter syndrome and also a huge difficulty to write. Writing is such a pain.
When people say like courage is having fear but doing it anyway, I think it's like exactly that. Just because it's there, right? It's like a feeling, you can't deny it. But what can we do about it? The only
Yeah,
thing we can do is freeze.
we shouldn't probably overthink, because when I start thinking, I'm like, oh, there are so many more voices that deserve to be heard than mine. I don't want to pollute the air, like leave space for somebody else. But I mean, I will never move on if I think like that.
Exactly. Each voice is unique, and each voice has its own stories to tell, and which its own colors. Is there anything you want to add, that you wanted to talk about the production of this movie that you didn't talk already? That's something that you want to mention?
I can tell you the two scenes from the film. The scene of the hairy leg. For me, it's the scene that summarizes the whole film. It's a metaphor to military dictatorship in all of it, but it also has humor and absurdity in it, and this is how people used to deal against the censorship. They used to use a metaphor like hairy leg or something just to get their message delivered. And in general, for me, this scene is kind of the summary of what we wanted to tell behind the film. And then there is something that some moment in the film that I really like craft-wise, that I found it really, really cool moment, It's when the police people get to the morgue and they get the leg and then they ride in the car and there is such a cool music, and I just think all of this moment is so cool to watch, I'm having like a really good time. Enjoy it when I watch it.
What is happening? It's so out of this world that it seems like absurd, impossible. But this kind of stuff happened. But like you said, have this sense of finding some kind of humor. Just give some different seasoning from these scenes, from these situations, because you can go full dark to be very faithful from what happened, or you can use elements of cinema to show that in terms of story, and the how many images you can evoke from these scenes. It's amazing. I saw another interview with Kleber talking about the La Perna Cabeluda, the hairy leg, about how some people read that as a fantastical, magical realism. And it was a very, very real thing that happened, like I said, to kind of deal with censorship.
Yeah.
But again, I think that's one of the ways you can notice that how powerful is this work, because people they have different readings of the context, and this complexity and this pluralism of different ways to watch the movie and comment the movie. I think it's one of the signs of a beautiful work.
Yeah, when a film or another type of art object stimulates something in you, I think it's the most important thing.
We can continue this for hours and hours, because there's so many layers that we can touch here. But thank you for your time, and congratulations on this beautiful, beautiful work.
Thank you, Leandro. It was a pleasure, and thank you for interesting questions.